Good afternoon, everyone. We are out in the middle of the Colorado Rockies right now, taking a fairly long hike. Probably getting rained on, but we're going to go see if we can't find a population of a very special plant up here. It's a unique wetland that we're going to visit, and hopefully it gives an idea of what I need to look for in some other areas where this plant is supposed to live. But we'll see what else we see along the way. There's a handful of wildflowers out right now, so hopefully we'll see some good ones along the hike. On the way up, there was a very brief view of a hermit thrush, a bird that is more commonly heard than seen, and quite famous for its iconic mountain song, as it were. And a beautiful look around as we took a breath, just in the forest in general. This is an area where a lot of the forest has died back from beetle kill, but new trees are starting to come up. You have new flowers starting to pop up in the undergrowth, and life continues anew. So at higher elevations here, pretty much anywhere where you get trees that start dying off, especially in the lower branches, you get quote-unquote reindeer moss. It's not a moss, not even a plant, but a lichen that's growing on the branches of these trees. In slightly shadier locations where moisture kind of remains on the branches for longer. And at first it gives the appearance that the plant is just kind of shaggy, but then when you compare that to a living pine tree like right next to it here, the difference is obvious. Now these are two different species. This is a blue spruce with much shorter needles, and this, I believe, actually this should be a ponderosa pine right here, but there's also Douglas firs out here. You can see trees here are not the tallest. They might get 50, 75 feet. But as we go higher in elevation, they get shorter. Now, slightly disappointing that we are apparently just a pinch too early to see it in flower. This, I believe, may be a Goodyeara species or related. Rattlesnake plantain, a species of orchid. I would need the flowers to confirm, but unfortunately, they're not in bloom just yet. Oh, and somebody snapped that one off. That's disappointing. But yeah, hopefully we might find another patch that's in bloom later. I would find a second patch, but sadly also not in bloom, as well as a couple of other potential orchids that were also not in bloom anymore. I had just missed the window for some of these, but the area was full of other interesting plants that I had never seen before, including my first wild monk's hoods, a very beautiful but extremely toxic species. Here we are at the end of the official trail. A large natural lake. Now, a lot of the lakes up here are man-made by damming up small streams and creeks and such. But this one is a large, shallow, probably salamander-filled lake that was formed just by water collecting in a natural depression here. And on the far edge, there may potentially be habitat for the plant I'm looking for. The presence of the pond lilies belies the nature of the lake as well. Broad, shallow, but fishless. And this right here, the first sign of what we're hoping to look for. Sphagnum clumps along the lake's edge. The plant we're looking for is an endemic to very low nutrient acidic habitats, and that's what sphagnum provides. These guys, they need constant moisture. They can't get too dried out. And if we look here, the water is currently about a foot below this clump of moss here, which is unnaturally low for this lake. It should be much higher, but the really, really dry winter and spring we had has kind of harmed that. Alright, you probably can't see it through the glare, but I did spot a salamander in here. Now these fishless lakes are really important for salamanders because they, oh, there he is. You might have seen a glimpse of him right there, swimming on by. But it's a very important, yep. Actually, he's not swimming by, he's just kind of in there. But this provides a place for them to grow unimpeded and without risk of getting predated on by fish. So in a lot of these high alpine lakes, the tiger salamanders actually remain neotenic, so they remain aquatic and larval looking all throughout their life. And unfortunately that brings a lot of people to mistake them for axolotls, which don't live up here, but everyone who comes up here sees the larval tiger salamanders and goes, oh, they must be axolotls that somebody released here. But no, it's just our native salamander. We've got a little boreal chorus frog. Beautiful. That's a very pale one. Interesting spotted pattern on him. Spectacular though. Then we got to see that guy too out here. It's the other main amphibian. Now, it would be really cool if there were some boreal toads out here, but I think that's unlikely. Well, it's not in bloom yet, unfortunately, again, but there we have a Spiranthes orchid. Another species common in the area where we're looking for the plant we're really trying to target, but another orchid on the list. Alright, something else I wasn't expecting. That's a leech. Just swimming free in the water here. They probably aren't the kind of leech that would attach to people, but a little creepy to see. There we go. An open Spiranthes. Beautiful. And there they are. Finally. What we came to see. Drosera rotundifolia, wild roundleaf sundews in Colorado. There are a handful of scattered populations of these guys around, but not very many. They are quite uncommon in the state. And, well, as we've found walking around the edge of the lake over here, you're going to have a bunch of perfect-looking habitat and not find any of them whatsoever. So, very nice to have finally located them. This is actually not on the main lake, but instead a tiny little offshoot lake that was off to the side. And right down at the swampy edge is where they're growing. They will only grow in very poor nutrient environments, acidic. And of course, sphagnum moss, as you can see, is the exact kind of habitat that they like for that. So, there is one other species of sundew, Drosera anglica, that is also found in Colorado. But there is only one known population, and I'm not sure if it's an area that I can actually conceivably reach very easily. So, but so glad to have finally located these guys in the wild. And they are so perfect looking. We're going to see if we can find a few more out here before we head back, but glad at least we've got it down. So there are a few others out here, and something you might notice is they look kind of scraggly and stretched out, and that's because they're actually trying to grow up above the moss, which has been outgrowing them here, as you can see. They've only got a handful of leaves that just kind of stick right up out of the top there, and you got the tentacles stretching out to capture insects that they'll then curl around and digest. What a beautiful plant, though. So they're definitely very scattered out here, but there's a handful of other populations around the lake here. This is definitely a much healthier looking population right here. There's all sorts of sundews on this little hummock. And they're just kind of scattered. You can find them just kind of growing out in the moss here. But that's a good sign that those ones over on the edge of the lake over there were not the only ones. They might be scattered all the way around here, in fact. Now this right here is probably what we're seeing the impact of from our really, really dry winter and spring. This is the only flower stalk I have seen so far on any of these guys, and it aborted. So these guys are not producing seeds this year, it looks like, which is a little concerning, but as long as they survive the next winter, they should have a chance to flower and seed next year instead. And we've got another chorus frog jumping among the sundews. He was actually sitting on a little patch of them a minute ago. He's got much stronger pattern than the last one did. That's so cool. In fact, I can zoom down here. There's the sundews that they were on. I may have actually significantly underestimated this population. There's actually a couple successful flowering ones right there. Look at that. And there's a huge bundle of them right here. That's a great sign. They're doing very well over on the edge of this lake. In fact, they are kind of all over the place out here. It's great to see, very healthy. Now you gotta be careful because this is in fact a floating bog right now. And well, if I step any further out, I will start to sink because I'm actually standing above water right now. And it's basically the moss that's holding everything up. You can see all the sundews along the edge there, growing in amongst the moss. Might not look like much at a glance, but honestly, that's one of the best little clumps I've seen so far. Very healthy, sitting on top of the moss. Maybe a flower stalk developing on one of them. Nope, that one aborted. Never mind. So only at the very edge of the lake are they flowering. I take that back. This is the healthiest patch that I've seen so far. My goodness. At least except for right on the lake edge where I can't actually access. Look at them all. And some of these are actually successfully flowering. You can see right there. That is a seed pod. There's something eating some of those seeds, but you do have some healthy seeds that are forming in some of these. Like that one there. There should be some healthy seeds in there. That's spectacular. This is all floating bog ground. Okay. Up until this point, the only carnivores that I had ever seen in the wild were a handful of flowering bladderworts at basically the Everglades Visitor Center down in Florida. Never been able to encounter them elsewhere, so finally getting to see these guys in the wild, roundleaf sundews, quite a rare plant in Colorado, was pretty amazing. There is of course the one rarer species, Drosera anglica, which I luckily now know where I can locate, and hopefully we will get to film that for a future video, but this was truly an amazing day, an amazing thing to see. Now, as we circled the lake, I discovered something very interesting. The best populations actually, not only on the edge of the lake, but also on kind of the southeastern side of the lake, where it's slightly cooler. So I don't know if that's really says anything about the environment, the particular microclimates they're looking for, and if that might keep them from being on the main lake edge, but who knows, maybe something to study. All right, so we succeeded in documenting a wild sundew population and confirming that even despite the drought this year, the floating bog is active, healthy, and the population of sundews is quite widespread around that little lake. Now, I'm still not entirely sure why they're found there and not throughout the rest of the main lake over here, where there are also floating bog spots and lots of sphagnum moss, but well, that's just kind of the nature of it. There may be some other restricting factor that I'm not sure about. Could be that maybe this lake fluctuates a lot more, or the sphagnum dries out too frequently, or perhaps there's just slightly more nutrients than the sundews can tolerate, but the sphagnum can, even though usually, like in cultivation, it's the reverse. That sphagnum dies before the sundews will, but who knows? It might require some sort of testing to actually find out. And as you can see, as I'm walking through here, this should all be underwater right now. But it's not. It's just way too dry out here. But we have our population, and just in time, because it looks like I'm going to get rained on the way down the mountain over here. It's about an hour's walk back to the car. Pretty little plant that I don't recognize. Looked orchid-like for a second, but there's no blue orchids out here. But if I see any other cool plants, I'll add them in, but we'll do an outro once we actually get back to the car. A few more musings as I'm going down the trail here. As you can see, we're already in a completely different habitat now. No open meadow, no sphagnous peat bog developing. And this is more the norm for the area. You have this habitat, and then you have sagebrush habitat. And how the plants manage to spread from one location to the next when they have such specific habitat requirements is kind of an interesting thing to ponder, because they have miles upon miles upon miles of unsuitable habitat that they have to pass through in order to find another suitable potential bog. Now, sphagnum, it's got spores that might get blown by wind, and they could go hundreds of miles. The sundews, they do have little seeds. They might be wind dispersed for a small distance, but usually not by much. So it could be they hitch a ride on bird feet, or it's entirely possible instead that what they are in right now is instead a relic of a much more ancient, widespread habitat. When it was colder here, the trees would have been either stunted or potentially completely non-existent even at this elevation. And so you had open, wet, boggy meadows in a lot more spaces, so there may have been a lot more widespread spaces for the sundews to grow. And as the climate warmed and dried, and the pine forests took over and sagebrush took over the lower valleys, the sphagnum habitats shrank, and with them, the plants that required them. So up on the hikes up here, sometimes you do find some little surprises that are nice to see. We got our wild raspberries up here. Now, there are a couple different rubus species that grow up here. You got wild raspberry. There are dewberries in parts of the Rockies. And potentially also wild blackberries, although I think those are more so invasive as you go further west. But handful of edible berries that are out here, and sometimes, if you're lucky, you can find them in large quantities. Other times, you just sometimes locate one that the bears haven't found yet. And in fact, there's the dewberry I was just talking about, Rubus parviflora. I think I'm saying that right. I'll put the right name up either way, but I am trying to grow this species at home too, not having too much success getting it really established and fruiting in the ground, but it doesn't look like they've had much success in fruiting here either. Although, who knows, perhaps they could just be... No, since those are dying off, I think they just failed. But they produce some very large red to black berries as well that are edible. All the rubus are. All right, folks. Trip was a success. We found what we were looking for. I don't know exactly what I'm going to be doing next, although I'm betting that the next time you see me on a wildlife-related trip, it's probably going to be some road cruising events closer to my house, Although there is a possibility, hopefully, if things pick up, that I may also be in New Mexico relatively soon, so fingers crossed. But until then, hope you enjoyed this little trip learning about some of the unexpected wild plants that you can find here in Colorado. And hope you'll stick with me for the next video. Make sure to like this one, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything coming up. And you can check out more information on the plants and animals that I work with at my website, carltoncarnivores.com, or on social media, where everywhere I am, it's Carlton Carnivores, of course. And if you'd like to help support the production of these videos, because these trips are expensive and the editing is time-consuming, etc., considering buying some of the plants or merchandise and such available at my website shop. Or you can become a Patreon member, where you get early access to these videos, access to the monthly seed contest that I do for members there, and more. Or if you don't want to do a monthly subscription thing, you can do one-time donations at ko-fi.com, or simply contact me for PayPal and such. But links for these things will be in the video description below. Until next time, I'm Hawken Carlton, and this is Carlton Carnivores.